Good morning, everybody. Well, what a week that was. You know, the final deal gets defeated by a record 230 votes, and we head straight on to a motion of confidence debate put forward by Mr. Corbyn, which loses by 19 votes. So she's still there. Yes, she's still the British Prime Minister. And tomorrow she'll come back to the House of Commons and tell us what the next steps are. Now, stories, rumours overnight that she's going to try and break the backstop problem by proposing a bilateral treaty between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom, something many of us thought at the beginning was the right way to deal with this. However, I can't see the European Union wanting to give up its authority on that. And then as we go through the rest of this week, and tomorrow might be rather dramatic, not just in the sense of what Mrs May says to the House of Commons, and the Cabinet extraordinarily are meeting this afternoon to discuss that, but a whole series of amendments that are being put down. People like Dominic Grieve, people like Nick Bowles, people like Yvette Cooper, a series of amendments being put down to either completely stop the idea that we leave on March 29th without a negotiated settlement with the European Union, to attempts to get Article 50 suspended. And, you know, for months, folks, I've been warning that is where I think this is going to go. Even talk that a committee of parliamentary chairs could actually take control of the whole process, leaving the executive, frankly, somewhat neutered. And this leads this morning to a series of headlines. I mean, the Sunday Times go with May in meltdown. The Telegraph, big warning here from Liam Fox. MP plotters risk political tsunami, warns Liam Fox, and he's talking about perhaps the political structures that we know today breaking apart and maybe new political parties coming along. And we'll discuss that at 11 o'clock this morning, because there's some speculation in the Sun newspaper about the formation of a Brexit party and whether I will or will not be involved in that. So we'll talk about that from 11 o'clock. Is British politics, and it was, in a sense, was Brexit the first earthquake? Are there more massive earthquakes to come in British politics? And the Express leads with, they will do anything to stop Brexit, referring to rebels in not just the Conservative Party, but of course in the Labour Party too. I have to say, yesterday, I went out yesterday morning and I went to the dry cleaners and did a bit of shopping and went to the wine merchants and one or two other things like that. It's not dry January for me. It's very interesting just being out for a couple of hours and meeting real people, normal people, not those who live inside the London, or in my case, Strasbourg bubble, and a general feeling that there is a crisis. Certainly, there's a massive crisis in Westminster. And I wonder, is there a sense of crisis now in the whole country? Well, we're going to debate that. What I do think is that the level of disconnect between the governors and the governed has never been wider in my lifetime. I can think back to 1974. I can think back to that post-3-day week period. I can think back to inflation at 27%, unemployment rocketing to a record 3 million, two general elections that took place in the space of about 8 months, a Labour Party in the end coming in with a majority of 3. I mean, the country really was in very, very deep crisis then. Is this country in crisis now? And if you think, yep, we're in pretty dire straits, we've become an international laughingstock, it's going to be bad for investment, and it's seriously bad news, call 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, what did you expect? You know, a big political change that we, the people, have tried to foist upon a parliament that is 75% Remain. Actually, Nigel, this is all pretty normal. It's what I expected. Then text to 84850. Or maybe the crisis just exists within politics and Westminster. Maybe what I was seeing on Saturday morning was almost a sense of unity. That regardless whether we voted Leave or Remain, we're getting on with our lives, and we're just appalled by how badly led we are, and frankly, how dishonest increasingly we think our political class are. If you think actually the crisis is Westminster and not out in the wider country, then please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course Facebookers who watch us live, you can comment there too. Sky data poll that came out on January the 16th, a couple of days back, said the majority of the public thinks the country is in crisis. 61% think we are in crisis, 34% think we are not in crisis, 5% either don't know or have just completely given up. They've shut the door. They don't want to know what's going on out there. Are we in crisis, or is it just confined to Westminster? Christian is a new caller from Switzerland. Good morning, Christian.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, as you look from the very stable Switzerland to this... well, it is stable, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it depends by the region. We had some issues on the border regions, but things are going fine. We have a deal with the European Union as well, and that's a kind of problem. That's why I look with interest to the British politics,
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, Christian, that was said here was that maybe our new relationship with the European Union should be a little bit like Switzerland's.
Well, yes or not, because honestly, here we have some issues with, to say, immigration, at least for the border regions, because of the free movement.
Yes.
There's we got a partial control of the borders, but it's not the way it's supposed to be to protect the internal market work. At least, I think that if we exclude big cities, we can have some issues with immigrations as well. It's not a question of bad integration. It's rather about, let's say, money. Sad but true.
Christian, is there not perhaps a slight parallel between British politics today and you talking about immigration and border regions? Because didn't the Swiss people have a referendum on ending free movement that their parliament have chosen to ignore?
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yes.
And, well, I want to be honest with you. The perception of the relationship between the non-EU countries like Switzerland and potential exit country like the UK is that it's always being described as apocalyptic, and that's a real media issue. Because if you want me to be honest, the description of the situation in the UK now, from the European point of view, sounds like apocalyptic. While you told me that life, everything is carry on as usual. So I think that that's just an opinion from outside, that the British politics didn't really insist on the fact that the European Union really needs the British economy, the British market.
Well, of course, Christian.
But I think, and they never say. I mean, I would like to hear that every day that the UK is the biggest import from Germany, and Germany lives with the export, because the European Union is being conceived for living on export. They basically destroyed the internal markets. That's the
Christian, I wish you'd been advising our Prime Minister on this, because she actually had some incredibly strong negotiating cards and she's never ever played them. Christian, thank you for your Swiss perspective on this. Your messages piling in. I don't think there's any crisis. Theresa May needs to deliver what we voted for, and that's leave. I'm not interested in any special relationship with the EU, and I'm more than happy leaving with no deal. Well, this is the point, isn't it? It was at that speech in Florence when the Prime Minister changed the narrative and said we are seeking a deep and special relationship. I didn't vote for that. I voted to leave, and ever since that day, I sense this has been going wrong. On Twitter, we are not in crisis. It's simple. We leave in March with no deal. The crisis is only in the minds of those who will not accept the result. Let's not needlessly complicate it. Folks, I agree with both of you. And of course, 498 MPs voted for us to leave, either with a withdrawal agreement or without one. The trouble is, as you're going to see, folks, tomorrow, there are lots of leading political figures from both the Conservative and Labour parties who will do their utmost to stop what they voted for and what we voted for from happening. James is calling from Manchester. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you. Nigel, I totally agree with you. I think there is a massive disconnect between the establishment and the people. I'm a Brexiteer, obviously. You only needed to watch Question Time last Thursday from Derby.
Unbelievable.
To see the absolute annihilation of the people that were like the Diane Abbotts that wanted us to stay and who actually said on Question Time that Labour would take anything from the EU, and the absolute roar when Isabel Oakenshaw, who I absolutely adore, said we should just leave on no deal, and the whole audience went up. I've never seen anything like it.
Do you know, James, I saw that, and because I know Isabel Oakeshott very well. And, you never quite know what you're going to get on Question Time. To be fair to them, they work very hard to balance their audiences and make them reflective of the towns or cities that they're going to. But, I mean, literally, when she said what she said, I've never and I've appeared 32 times on Question Time. I know that programme better than most. And I have to say, James, I've never seen a reaction like it. She simply said, we voted to leave, let's leave. It was remarkable, wasn't it?
Yeah, and can I just quickly say as well, Nigel, I've just come back from Poland. I was in Krakow. Now, I was there on 6th of January, which is, my birthday, and I was at the Three Kings March. You should have seen the populism that is going on in Poland at the moment. And what I was finally going to say, because I know you've got to get to the news, I was going to quickly say, this government, the way it's going right now, is opening up the floodgates to the next party that is going to be a populist party and a far-right party, and they are now literally inviting those people to be in, and I will be voting for that as well. Well,
James, that, of course, is what Liam Fox was warning about, and we're going to debate this in full from 11 o'clock. James, thank you for your perspective. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 10:15. Well, 61% of people tell a Sky Data poll that they believe the country is in crisis. What is beyond doubt is that Westminster is in crisis. Our political parties are in pretty deep crisis. But is the country as such in crisis? Richard from Ashford says the country isn't in crisis as such. This is not war. It's just a battle between people and the political class, because I wish they'd stop using terms like crashing out on people's vote. All they're doing is try to deny the will of the people. Well, there's certainly a lot of that going on. And Alan shows me why I think there is a crisis in the sense of trust. The relationship between the governors and the governed. And Alan says on Twitter, I've spoken to lots of people where I live here in Kent, and the majority of them have told me that if Brexit is not fully delivered, they will never vote again. Now, you may have seen, folks, some opinion polls in the last 48 hours suggesting that Remain now has a bigger lead than it's had since polling day. Now, whether that's true or not and how it's been weighted is a separate issue. But one thing that is true, and I listened to Professor John Curtis on this yesterday, is he says nobody who voted Leave has changed their minds. But there are some people who voted Leave who are so upset, so distressed at the level to which they've been ignored, that at the minute, when they're asked, how would you vote in a second referendum, they just say, to hell with it, we wouldn't bother, what's the point, it's never going to get delivered. And that is an absolutely massive, fundamental breakdown of trust that suggests to me that not only is our whole relationship with democracy in crisis, but that actually extraordinary things could happen from here on. Gareth is a new caller from Newport in South Wales. Hi, Gareth.
Hi there, how are you?
I am well. Gareth, do you sense crisis in South Wales, or is it just Westminster that's got his knickers twisted?
Definitely with South Wales as well, because I'm actually from the poorest borough, so Blaenau Gwent,
yes,
which we actually have Labour for us, and to be honest, they're getting worse and worse and worse. And I've seen what Alan Davis put on the ballot paper when they voted. He didn't care either way, but that's not delivering. We at Blaenau Gwent actually voted to leave. It was a big. That was it for us. We decided to leave, and for him to write on that paper saying either way, it's just a waste of space. And I just think the two biggest political parties together, there's no trust between them. They don't want to talk to each other. They're at loggerheads. So we're just up the creek, really, without a paddle, I reckon.
Now, South Wales, Gareth, was one of those areas that surprised the establishment with just how big a Leave vote it was.
Yeah.
And Wales as a whole, of course. I mean, what do you sense, Gareth? Do you sense people are upset to the point of never wanting to vote again, or do you sense they're angry and want this delivered? Which is the sort of dominant thought that you get?
It's definite anger, because I voted to leave as well. Because, obviously, we managed before the EU. The UK managed perfectly well. Wales was thriving, and now we've just got handouts from the EU. Nothing's coming in for us anymore. And I believe we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and do what we need to do. And I don't think anybody would vote again, because look at this one. Nothing's happening. Nothing's happening at all.
Do you see any light, Gareth, at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I do. Yeah, I do see a light, but not with Theresa May or Corbyn, to be honest.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what. The failure of leadership is quite astonishing. Gareth, you're a star. Thank you. Tom in Ottershaw says the problem with Parliament isn't trust; it's delusion. May thinks she has a credible plan. Grieve is convinced he's a Democrat, and Corbyn imagines he's got an alternative. I quite like that. Let's cheer me up a bit. Gosh, we need it sometimes at the moment. Andrew is calling from Warwick. Andrew, good morning. Are we in crisis, Andrew, or is it just our politics?
Hello again, Nigel. No, I think this is a wonderful thing. People don't think of childbirth as a crisis, do they? I mean, it's a massive change, and there's usually lots of sort of shouting and drama.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, this has been an absolutely wonderful thing. It's shone a very, very bright spotlight exactly where the current establishment doesn't want it shone. It's illustrated that there's been slow, slimy slide towards a sort of from proper democracy, parliamentary representative democracy, to a sort of very, very continental elitist elected dictatorship. And this is absolutely unconscionable to a people that developed things like golf and rugby and football and cricket, things that are based on rules where everybody understands what the rules are going to be, and we all agree, and whoever wins, wins. This is a wonderful thing to happen. This is going to be, I mean, yes, it's absolutely the time for new parties, but yeah.
So Andrew, this sunlight that has been shone onto our politicians, our political parties, the whole process, you think this in the end will lead to radical change and put us in a better place?
Yes, I think it will. I mean, the fact is that mainstream media has changed. I mean, as I think you've said as well, with YouTube showing your talks in Parliament, the mainstream media are now very much on the back foot and are being forced to be far more honest about things. I mean, the way the D-notices have been issued about the Gilets jaunes in Spain or in France, all that happens is that the presence of D-notices then reported on mainstream media, followed by a whole load of video evidence.
And of course the internet. And of course the internet means you can't stop this stuff getting out now anyway, can you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other thing that I think is going to be very, very positive is the fact that, I mean, there was an absolute betrayal in so many different vectors in Theresa May's deal. That in actual fact, it was almost a roadmap of exactly what must be changed. Because of the fact they've come out and said these are all things we want to do. What they've actually done is these are all the soft points. These are all things that we don't want to lose. I mean, including it's again shone a fantastic spotlight on the defence issues. I mean, you've had Richard Dealove actually writing to the Times and saying, for God's sake, don't go with it because of these reasons.
And Charles Guthrie, the former CIGS.
Yes, sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, Andrew, just very quickly, has this also put a spotlight on Theresa May's ability as a leader? And do you think if she went, we might be in a better place?
Oh, I think that goes without saying. I mean, she's rather wandered around with a sort of showerhead of spotlight on her. She's been incompetent from the absolute start. And the problem is that because she is being run by other people who dictate the ways of government, she's had to do things that have been progressively more and more ridiculous, to the point where it's really got to it's like watching a massive version of the Parrot sketch.
Right. Okay. Andrew, great perspective. And Andrew, they're saying, look, we can all see what a rotten bunch they are, and that means big change is coming, and we're going to re-democratise this country. It's a wonderfully positive mindset to hear, and we perhaps need a little bit more than that. Yes, there is a crisis, and you are responsible, Mr Farage. Thank you. Well done, Dominic Grieve and Nick Bowles and Yvette Cooper. Let's stop Brexit and save our country, Paul from Bevan. I tell you what, Paul, come on, grow up. Let's stop democracy. You can't have these peasants voting about their own future. Why not get a few people like Dominic Grieve? Form a committee, abolish elections. Gosh, wouldn't that be wonderful? I find that line of argument just truly incredible, but there you are. Some people hold it. I voted Remain, Nigel, but I always respected the result. However, if there's a second vote, I will vote Leave and then never vote again in any election in my lifetime. The will of the people must be carried out. Well, Mick, you'd have thought so. Sebastian is a new caller from the Rhondda in South Wales. Good morning, Sebastian.
Good morning, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you. I myself, I'm a young voter. I'm a Brexiteer.
Yes.
I still believe in Brexit.
Yes.
But I think the problem is definitely, as you said, I think most Leave voters, we stand our ground. We believe in the vote. We want to carry it through. We want to be listened through. But I think what is worrying for me personally, I voted Conservative because they promised that Brexit we all voted for.
Yep.
But they are virtually a Remain party. They've watered down the Brexit they promised. Labour's moving in a direction of a second referendum.
Yep.
And the UKIP vote has disappeared. And I think if a new Brexit party is desperately needed, and I think for that to work, I think it has to unify those traditional Labour voters and those and the Conservative voters. I think it needs to bring the two sides of Leave voters together, and I think it would definitely cause a shake-up in Westminster, one which is strong on workers' rights, for example, bringing back manufacturing jobs and things, but it's tough on things like immigration. But I think that's definitely what is needed now is a new party.
Sebastian, we will debate that at length from 11 o'clock this morning. And do you sense, living where you are, is the crisis in Westminster, or are you feeling it in the Rhondda too?
It's definitely in Westminster. The politicians just determined to do anything they can to brush aside the vote, not listen to us. They didn't like the answer we gave them, basically, Nigel.
I know.
I mean, they just determined Dominic Grieve, Anna Soubry. Oh my God, we could be here all day listening.
What do you think of these? What do you think of these people, Sebastian? Keep it clean. Keep it clean.
Oh, of course, Nigel. My own MP, he voted to Remain and everything. Of course, everybody has a right to their own opinion and things. But the difference was with the Brexit vote, they decided to give the vote to us, whereas in normal elections, we transfer sovereignty to them. We put our trust in them, and we re-elect or boot them out every 5 years, for example. But they decided to give the decision to us, and they should implement the decision which we gave them, and that's to leave.
Yeah,
stay in this and stay in that.
Sebastian, we voted for it and they voted for it because 498 of them voted for Article 50. Sebastian, thank you for your passion there from the Rhondda. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 10:30. And so Mrs May goes back to the House of Commons tomorrow after her cabinet meeting, unusually on a Sunday afternoon. She will give her new Brexit plan. We're expecting to hear something about the Irish backstop along the lines of a proposed bilateral treaty with the Republic of Ireland, not something that Monsieur Barnier, I think, is going to accept. We're going to have a whole series of amendments being put in by Nick Bowles, Yvette Cooper, of course Dominic Grieve, the hero of the hour for the Remainers. And they're going to try every trick in the book to take as much power away from the executive, the government, as they possibly can. And this argument, by the way, that isn't this wonderfully democratic, that Parliament's taking back power? Well, I don't think Parliament wants to take back power from the government. It wants to take back power from the people, and that really is the big problem with this. So we'll get attempts to stop us leaving on no deal. We'll get attempts to extend Article 50. We'll no doubt get attempts to try and sign us up to a Norway deal, but it'll be Norway without the fish. It'll be much worse than Norway's deal. And of course, that won't actually please Leavers or Remainers, and would in fact in many, many ways be just pretty much as bad as the deal that Mrs May had kicked out last week. So any of you think Do any of you think that the political crisis in Westminster is going to ease this week, given that on the 29th of January, the following Tuesday, there's going to be a debate and yet another final vote? The answer is no. The crisis in Westminster is very real. I'm just trying to examine whether it's out there in the country as a whole, or whether maybe in an odd way there's a bit of unity against all our politicians. Much of this, folks, this is not a failure of Brexit, it's a failure of leadership. And I'm reminded this morning of an interview that Michel Barnier gave to Le Point magazine back in 2016, and I quote directly: "I would have succeeded in my task if, in the end, the deal is so hard on the British that they prefer staying in the European Union." Well, I've got to tell you, Barnier, I wish you were on our side, because you're really pretty good. Mind you, our lot are blooming hopeless. I mean, our civil servants and everybody, we concede. Theresa the Appeaser is happy with that approach, and we wonder why we finish up in the end having been beaten. Matt is a new caller from Norwich. Matt, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
Well, I think we can all agree that Westminster is in deep crisis. Is the country in crisis, Matt? Or actually, are we going to come out of this a better, stronger place?
Well, I think there's a couple of points. One caller made earlier on Andrew Castle regarding that the country isn't quite in crisis. Everyone is going about their daily business, but Brexit is certainly a cloud over everyone that everyone does really want resolved. I've got a point regarding Corbyn's laughable stance on not negotiating.
Yep.
Try and take no deal off the table.
Yep.
I don't know why Theresa May. He's concerned with the amount of money spent on no deal, which we should be doing as our only bargaining tool. But she says to the EU that we deduct all preparation costs for no deal in order to counter their potential last-minute deal on the last day. So whatever we spend on preparing for a no deal between now and the 29th of March, that's deducted from the 39 billion. And that might appease Corbyn a little bit, because he's concerned about the costs of what is due diligence. And I'm saying this from a person who's not scared of no deal at all, but in order to demonstrate that and play their hand a little bit from a position of strength, which is where we should be.
Well, of course, I mean, perhaps, Matt, one of the big benefits of what we call no deal, WTO exit, one of the big benefits is that it would save us 39 billion. It's quite attractive in one way, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and if we would say to the EU, if your potential last-minute deal that's going to come through costs us another 4 billion no deal, they're going to get less money and it will play their hand a little bit, but we're going to save it overall anyway. So it just means putting that infrastructure in place. And I come from the industry, construction, that everyone is fearful of, that Brexit is one of the big scaremongering elements is associated with the construction industry. But if you speak to a lot of the European workers within the industry, which I'm very close to, they would not tolerate what is going on or has been going on in this country, in their own country. If you speak to working class people that work on sites from Eastern European, who I don't have a problem with, they're some of the best workers we've got in the industry, but they turn around and will say to us here, they would not have tolerated this in their own country, what's gone on over here for a period of years.
Of course not.
Politicians are not close enough to be able to speak to those people and ask the opinion of them in their own countries. They would not have put up with it. And we're trying to do it in a democratic way, and it's been taken away from them. And they would be honest with you and said that the process that they would have gone about would be more down the lines of the yellow vests, I'm sure, because they would aggressively say that they would not put up with it in their own country.
Well, Matt, one of the proposals here that Nick Bowles and Stephen Kinnock and others are involved in is this sort of Norway-type deal, which of course would mean the continued free movement of workers right across Europe. It just appears, Matt, at every level they want to frustrate our will. But no, your points about construction are well made, and thank you. Phil in Wales says, to those who say they will not vote again, they'll be handing Remainers full control. Ray makes much the same point on Facebook and says, politicians would love us never to vote again. Never give them what they want. So a little bit of defiance there. I think my view is, if we did have to go through the agony of a second referendum, because our political class just can't accept the result of the first, I have a feeling many of those people at the moment saying they won't vote, they probably actually would, because they'd be so upset about the whole thing. Omar is a new caller from Canterbury in Kent. Good morning to you.
Hello, I'm from the University of Kent, but I usually live in London. And
okay.
I think that there really is a crisis, but I think the crisis is actually with politicians and in politics itself. I think politicians just simply don't understand why people voted leave. And obviously my university is Kent, and here in Kent, everyone, because we're all students, a lot of people are Remainers. So I think they don't really understand the issue as well. But I think one of the main reasons why people voted leave was because of free movement of people. And I think it's an issue that simply just doesn't affect politicians that much. And most politicians, even if they do think it, they're kind of scared to mention it because they're seen as a racist or xenophobic. And I think, like, free movement of people does put strains on the NHS, although obviously it's due to underfunding as well, but the NHS waiting times is very high. Public transport is crammed. State schools are jam-packed.
Yeah, Omar, absolutely.
Labouring jobs, as Matt was just saying, is really affected, but this doesn't affect politicians, so they're just out of touch. That's what it really comes down to.
Well, if you work in construction, Omar, and you've got a skill, bricklaying, whatever it may be, in many cases, your wages have been driven down significantly over the course of the last 10 years. Omar, when you say the things that you just said to me, to your colleagues at the University of Kent down there, what reaction do you get from your age group down there?
They just simply don't agree, and they don't seem to understand. And they try to make it more like trying to say you just don't understand what EU is, and it's just a close-knit, nice family kind of thing. That's the type of idea that they try to bring across. Yeah,
I think that's right. I think a lot of young people have been sort of brought up to believe that somehow the EU is progressive, it's nice, we're all great mates, we're all great friends, we've got Erasmus student exchanges, and what they don't see, Omar, is this authoritarian, undemocratic, anti-democratic centre. And I think a lot more work needs to be done to explain to young people that actually it's Brexit that's liberating. It's Brexit that makes us go global. And of course, famously, Omar, the students at your university turned out to vote in the general election in huge numbers, and Canterbury finished up with a Labour MP. Mm-hmm. Quite extraordinary. Yeah. We will actually, Omar, do keep listening, because at 11 o'clock, we're going to have a professor from your university called Matthew Goodwin, who's going to be on the programme helping us understand party politics and its future. Thank you very much indeed for your call. And Omar there, clearly very much in a minority in his current settings. Steve is a new caller from Worksop. Good morning, Steve.
Morning, Nigel. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you.
Well, I'm going to talk to you. So are we in crisis, Steve?
Colours to the mast and let you know I'm a staunch Brexiteer.
Right.
But I do genuinely want to put an end to the crisis in any way that we could, which is... So my idea is this, that we extend Article 50. I know you're not going to like that.
Oh, dear. I need the smelling salts. I mean, if you're on my side, I'm in real trouble, Steve. But go on.
No, you haven't heard all of it.
Okay.
That we have a second referendum. Take a deep breath. But you let the parliamentarians, in the meantime, come up with their version of Brexit, which is probably, as you've been saying, along the Norway lines. And then on the second referendum, you have a ballot for their version of how they see it best and WTO rules. Mm-hmm. That allows people like Jacob and the ERG to be able to get behind a parliamentary process that would incorporate the best Parliament can come up with, whilst at the same time knowing that while whatever the period is allowed, WTO will be prepared for, and then you put that back to the people.
Well, it's a thought, Steve. I mean, look, I'm completely opposed to a second referendum. I'm completely opposed to the extension of Article 50. But, Steve, as I've been saying for some time, I think extension of Article 50 is the most likely outcome. And a second referendum, even though there's no great public demand in the country for it, certainly the Labour Party now appear to be pretty close to endorsing it. It's just Corbyn that really is holding them up. Steve, let me put a different idea to you. What about we stop MPs' pay until they deliver Brexit? What about that?
Well, that's undemocratic. They earn the money. They've been voted for their job and they're entitled to it. What they're not entitled to do is try and take our democracy away from us. And the reason why I've suggested everything I can is because I think that actually, if you did analyse what I said, you would find the majority of the people that would be against it would be those who are genuinely anti-democratic and who will try anything they can to remain. And it will give everybody the opportunity to vote again on how we leave.
Well, Steve, one thing's for certain. One thing's absolutely for certain, that if we do get a second referendum, the question will be absolutely key, and you've put some forethought into it, and I thank you for it. Kelly on Facebook says a general election or referendum would serve no purpose. Fair bit of speculation in the newspapers today that she might be getting ready for a general election. But, of course, she's promised the 1922 committee that she wouldn't stand again as leader of the Conservative Party in another general election. Mind you, she's made a lot of promises before that haven't been kept. You're listening to a Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's now 10:45. Politics in crisis. Is the country in crisis? Well, something it is, something it isn't. Maybe we're all uniting around our total distrust of our political class and we're looking for a better way forward. Maybe our politicians, as one caller suggested from Warwick earlier, maybe our politicians have been exposed and this will lead to big democratic change in the future. On Twitter I get, if I hear the phrase, all options remain on the table one more time, I think I'm going to lose it. Yes, I know what you mean. Because actually what we do want, I tell you what we do want to end any sense of crisis. The country wants leadership and it wants resolution on this issue. Give us what we voted for, there'll be no crisis. Oh, you in Westminster may hate it, but don't worry. You'll get jobs at some of the big corporate companies, or maybe the European Commission will take you on for a couple of years. But the rest of us want leadership. We want to move on, and that is the common view. Lewis is a new caller from Poole. Good morning, Lewis.
Good morning, Nigel. It's an honour to talk to you this morning.
Well, that's very sweet of you. Thank you. So, Lewis, tell me, are we in crisis, or is it just the mess in Westminster?
Well, let me break them down for you, Nigel. I'll break them down. All students are Remainers. I'm 18, just turned 18, I'm a student. And what all students have grown up with is this EU in the current form. The bailout of Greece, we've seen problems with the Italian budget, problems with the Hungarian government. And when faced with the choice between young people backing the vote for an EU or for their own votes in the UK, I think young people actually, despite the betrayal in the media, I think will back the votes of themselves in the UK. All
right. But why, Lewis, why do so many of your generation... I mean, look, come on, it's not overwhelming, but it's two-thirds, a third. Why do a majority of your age bracket seem to think that this European form of government is better than nation-state democracy? Why is it?
I mean, I'm not too sure. I mean, it's an easy, well, especially in the campaign for Remain.
Yeah,
there's a lot of argument about young people's futures, and I think that's something that's been latched onto. I think there's a lot of opportunity outside of the EU, as we've been told and as we can see. And I think that's been ignored by a lot of young people. And I think there's been a negative case for Brexit, especially in Westminster, with young people's futures. And I think that has put young people down the path where they think remaining is somehow the best thing. But when the EU falls apart, as it seems to be doing, then there's trouble for the future of young people.
Yeah, well, I take that view too. The idea that being run by Mr. Juncker is somehow the future of young people, I find totally and utterly extraordinary. And Lewis, what do you think of what do you make of the Dominic Greaves and people like this who basically want to overturn Brexit? I mean, they're saying it's for our own good, Lewis.
It's interesting to see. I mean, definitely they should have a say. This is a democracy. Of course, people should be able to have their say. But when it takes a step further, especially with these amendments we've seen, it's pushing it.
It's pushing it. Yeah. Well, it's
against the boundaries of what the people said. Yeah.
Yeah. Pushing it is a very polite way of putting it. Lewis, thank you very much indeed. Interesting 18-year-old perspective there. And I've noticed over the last few weeks a lot more young people calling in from both points of view, and that's a very welcome good thing. Luke is a new caller from Gravesend. Good morning, Luke.
Hi, good morning, Nigel. Thank you for having me on the show.
Not one little bit. So you're there, very much in a Leave area, and you've got a Leave and you've got a strong Leave MP, of course.
I have a fantastic MP, Adam Holloway. Fantastic representative for Gravesend. Now, I'm 26. I've been a member of the Conservative Party since I was old enough to join.
Yep.
It is heartbreaking watching people like Dominic Grieve hold the people in such contempt. He seems to be unable to accept the fact that there are loads and loads of people from outside of London who voted to leave the European Union. And it seems like we're now approaching a crisis where it's not about leaving the EU anymore. This is about democracy. This is about listening to people.
Well, yes. I mean, we voted for it in a referendum. We followed it up in a general election, Luke, as you well know, and then 500 of them voted for Article 50. So given, and I'm certain that there is this massive breakdown of trust between our politicians and the people living in Gravesend and elsewhere, how do we get out of the other end of this, Luke?
Well, I think what MPs need to do is they need to stop being blinded by what I perceive as very middle-class benefits of the European Union, such as going on nice weekend breaks away and having cheap imported wine. It's about listening to the fact that 17.4 million people came out and voted, and you cannot go back to those people and say, do you know what, actually, even though the government spent millions of pounds sending you propaganda, even though throughout the entirety of the referendum you were told you were going to be worse off, that there was going to be a recession on the day of voting to leave, and that jobs were going to be lost, to then say to them, well, actually, do you know what, despite the fact that we told all of you how wrong we were and you still came out and voted, we're not going to listen to you anyway. There will be a political crisis like nothing other.
Well, this is what Liam Fox is saying, isn't it? Liam Fox is saying that MP plotters risk a political tsunami.
Absolutely. And they deserve it, Nigel. These people like Dominic Grieve and Anna Soubry and Yvette Cooper should be careful what they wish for, because they will struggle to win their seats back again.
Well, two of those, Luke, are in your party and you're a paid-up member. Do you think their local association should try and deselect them?
I mean, do you know what? I can't believe I'm saying this, but maybe yes. I've always believed that we should be a broad church in the Conservative Party. I've always seen myself to be to the left of our party, and I've always looked up to people like Anna Soubry, Nicky Morgan, Nick Bowles, and so on. But they clearly do not want to listen to the views of people, many of whom are working class, living on the outskirts of London, living in what people disparagingly call the Brexit belt. They seem to be just EU obsessed. I don't understand why.
Well, there's a very interesting piece yesterday, Luke, in The Times, written by Matthew Parris, a former Conservative MP and still a Conservative supporter, and he's basically saying that Jacob Rees-Mogg and the ERG should be kicked out of the Conservative Party. So how on earth do you solve this?
Oh, gosh, I mean, that is the million-dollar question. I think what it is that we need to do is realise that we've got a Marxist, anti-Semitic government at the door, potentially run by Jeremy Corbyn, who is waiting his chance to get a general election. We need to unite behind that and remember that hard-working people, they can't afford a Labour government, they can't afford a Corbyn government. They also wanted to leave the European Union, and I think if the Conservative Party seriously wants to govern in the future, then it really needs to listen to those people. Or
I think Luke, too true. Thank you. On Twitter, and this came up last week a few times, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the next few weeks. If there was another vote, we should rule out Remain rather than No Deal. And I think, a referendum on how we leave might be more acceptable than a referendum that attempts to completely overturn the previous referendum before it's actually even been carried out. Nicola is a new caller from Coventry. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel, and I'm pleased to be able to speak to you. I've admired you from long afar, as they say.
Well, that's very, very sweet of you. Thank you. So,
my sort of perspective of this is that my mother was Italian, my father was Ukrainian. I was born here, and I'm a very strong Brexiteer and voted to go out of Europe. And there is not a crisis in the people. I think there's a crisis in the House of Commons with the politicians. And I think it's absolutely wrong that Dominic Grieve and the amendments he wants to put is going to try to stop the will of the biggest ever vote there was of the people. And I also think to myself, I voted to be in the common market all those years ago because it was a trading bloc of nations.
And that's how it was sold. That's how it was sold to you, yes.
Yeah. Well, the EU, the way I look at it, the EU is not such a trading bloc of nations. It's a political entity. It is a political football, as they say, and they want to do a United States of Europe, and they want a single army and so forth. And that, to me, I don't agree with. The other thing I would say is these people who are in Europe are supposed to be our friends and allies. People died in the wars for this, for the freedoms that we have. And we went out, I know people don't always want to talk about the war, but it is a fact. We went over there and we actually saved the Europeans a lot in the war, and they want now to hurt us. We should actually go out and go with the no deal, be forceful about it, because I don't think personally deep down they want to have a no deal, but they don't believe it. The House of Commons here are doing their work for them.
Well, it's not been
when you say we'll take no deal off.
It's not been a credible threat from the start. Michaela, thank you for your call. Thank you for your passion. Michaela, dead right there, that actually, Europe is not what we're voting to leave. It's the European Union, run by the European Commission. It's the institutions in Brussels. That's what I've got a problem with, not the idea of a Europe, of sovereign nation states, and we could be the best, closest neighbours in the world. Change is needed, in my view, not just for the UK. I don't just want us to leave the European Union. I want Europe to leave it as well. Well, interesting, and a few callers in the first hour have sort of talked about this, but with major splits in the Conservative Party and with reports today that the Labour Party have lost 150,000 members amid a growing backlash over Corbyn's stance on Brexit, I'm keen to find out from you whether the two major parties can survive as they are post-Brexit. And if you think, yep, first past the post system means they will survive the test of time, then call 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think nothing ever can change British politics, let alone Brexit. Text to 84850. Or maybe the time has come for a new party, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and I'll respond to those newspaper reports about me and a new political party. Well, there is a real crisis inside the Conservative Party, and I would suggest inside the Labour Party too. The Tories virtually at war with each other, and, today we have Liam Fox warning on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, MP plotters risk political tsunami. And we heard plenty of callers this morning, Conservative supporting and Conservative members, and you're almost getting to the point where Matthew Parris wants the ERG expelled from the Tory party. Many of you this morning want to see Dominic Grieve deselected or booted out, and you wonder how long can this go on. Similarly with Labour, as the Tory party at grassroots seems to become more of a Leave party for the day, the Labour Party membership, not all their voters mind, but the Labour Party membership appear to be more pro-second referendum, and that, of course, is where Keir Starmer wants to take it, and clearly Jeremy Corbyn resisting that. And I wonder whether these two political parties can survive as they are. Brexit was an earthquake. I said I was going to try and cause an earthquake in British politics, and the aftershocks of that we see every single day. But also, I wonder whether our associations with we're a Labour family, we're a Conservative family, I wonder whether that actually is beginning to change, beginning to break down. Well, helping me through this is Professor Matthew Goodwin, author of National Populism, The Revolt Against Liberal Democracy, and he is Professor of Politics from the University of Kent. Matthew, good morning to you.
Good morning.
In historical terms, how big are these splits that we're seeing within the Conservative Party and a bit in Labour too?
Oh, I think these are truly remarkable splits. The issue with Brexit, of course, is that it cut across both of the main parties like a hot knife through butter. Lots of people in Labour seats voted Leave, while lots of its members are passionate Remainers. But on the Conservative Party, too, while 70% of Conservative voters say they still back Leave, there's not an insignificant 25 to 30%, particularly around London areas, that are more Remain. And I think that's creating space for something new in British politics. Even last night, just quickly, we had two opinion polls, which I found absolutely remarkable. 79% of all voters agreed with the statement that most politicians do not take account of the views and concerns of ordinary people.
Wow.
And 64% felt that the two main parties do not offer them an appealing choice of who to vote for.
So that is disenchantment with... So that's the real crisis here, isn't it? A total breakdown in faith in our political structures, in any sense of connection with Westminster. But Matthew, does that sense of disenchantment, does that suggest that a new party could capitalise on this?
Well, I think there's unquestionably space for something, particularly that was committed to Brexit. We had some polling a couple of months ago that suggested 3/4 of Leavers would consider voting for a new party that was unequivocally committed to Brexit. And I think that's the key point, that on the Leave side, there is a great deal of disillusionment with Theresa May's deal. and I think a sense that the mainstream parties have never quite understood what Brexit was really about. And I suspect that's why this morning, Nigel, there's lots of stories about possibly you leading a new political party, and whether that space is something that you think you want to go for.
Well, my position on it, Matthew, is I felt UKIP did its job incredibly successfully. We took it from nothing to winning a European election and doing some extraordinary things and changing British politics. I can't stand idly by and watch Brexit, just sort of get hosed down the drain, and I won't do that. But the difficulty, Matthew, this story today that is there in the Sun, and I'll talk more about it as the next hour goes on, says that a Brexit party has registered with the Electoral Commission and is seeking approval to be a registered political party, and that I know the person that's done it, and they're doing it with my full approval and support. And that's as far as it goes, Matthew, at the moment. But how do you... It's very tough, isn't it, with British politics? Because of the first past the post system, and I've knocked on doors, and they say to me, we're Labour. We're Conservative. Their tribal identity to those political parties over the last 100 years and more is so strong that it's been very difficult, Matthew. I mean, UKIP did a good job of it, but it's very difficult to get people, even on a policy they care about, to give up their usual family party. Is there any evidence that that's changing?
Well, I think you're right in terms of the context has changed. We might not have European Parliament elections which have helped outsider parties. Those challengers might instead be forced to rely on things like local elections and perhaps really focusing on a few constituencies to really try and get over the hurdle. But I do think, I do sense that there's something changing in British politics, and I think there are three real dimensions to that. I think the first is people are fed up with Westminster and how Brexit's been managed, particularly those that voted leave. I think, secondly, there's a real worry among, again, leavers that they're just going to be betrayed, they're not going to be listened to. And I see that in all of the focus groups that I sit in. And I think, thirdly, over the longer term, there's going to remain very sharp public anxiety over the issue of immigration. And if you look at how that policy has been changing over the last few months, with the fact that non-EU immigration is going to increase and EU immigration will probably stall or may not stall, we'll have to wait and see. I think those three areas are areas where a new party would find a receptive audience. Indeed, the only thing I would add to that, actually, is that when YouGov looked 6 months ago at where there was space for a new party in British politics, they concluded that space was not for an anti-Brexit centrist party, but was for a more conservative-orientated party that was tough on crime, that was pro-Brexit, that was talking about these issues which many voters feel none of the mainstream parties are talking about. So I actually think fundamentally something has changed.
So in that sense, then, a Brexit party, but one that also took on these issues such as, you talk about being tough on crime and how immigration is this huge issue. So it wouldn't just be a one-issue party that was needed then. It would need to be broader than that, you think, to succeed?
Well, I think parties that focus on only one issue are always vulnerable for when that issue really is seen to be dealt with, or when that issue comes and goes on the landscape. I think when I look at what voters are saying, at least in the surveys and again in focus groups, that sense of disillusionment isn't only about Brexit. I think for some voters, Brexit's become a proxy for that. There's a whole host of concerns, for example, about why London gets so much and everywhere else gets so little, about why we invest so much in the South East, about different quality of schools and healthcare across the UK. There's real concerns about a sense that England isn't getting its fair share in the broader settlement. And, of course, very strong worries about how globalization is continuing to create a society that many people feel is neither fair nor equal. And all of that really, I think, is about people wanting to radically shake up the existing settlement. And new parties always do well. I mean, look at Europe. Emmanuel Macron stepped out of the party system and completely reshaped French politics. Italian five-star stepped out of the established system and with less than 10 years was parachuted into government. We are seeing things, I think, at least in the European landscape that are truly unprecedented. And, you know, Britain doesn't feel to me as stable and secure as perhaps it once did in terms of party politics.
Fascinating. Matthew, thank you very much indeed. That was Matthew Goodwin, author of National Populism and Professor of Politics from the University of Kent. And he says things are changing. There is now perhaps a gap there for a new political party. Well, I wonder what Ken, a new caller in Southend, thinks. Ken, Matthew was saying that our sort of allegiances are beginning to break down to the old parties. Is that what you think?
I totally agree. If they're going to be completely non-democratic about it, then yes, I think it has to be. If they're going to ignore 17 million people voted for, you know, a win is a win, whether it's 1-0 or 5-0, isn't it? Yeah, if we're using small terminology.
Ken, I mean, let me ask you something. I mean, how do you normally vote?
I've been a Tory all the way through my life. I have questioned that at various times. My family did lose, quite a lot in the 90s and under the Tory government. But having analysed policies and history, I'm quite a fan of history. I've always made a decision to go down the route of Tory. But I'm questioning that now. I really am. I don't think that, if they're going to ignore the vote of people, I think that we really should make a change.
All right, but Ken, let me try this on you. So this Brexit party has applied for registration. Let's say that it gets registration. Let's say that I decide to join it and other people do. And let's say there's a general election in a few weeks' time. And you in your constituency down in Southend are facing a hard left Corbynista candidate, and you want to vote for the Brexit party, but you might think to yourself, well, hang on, if I vote for the Brexit party, because they're very new, they're not going to win this seat, and my vote might make Mr. Corbyn Prime Minister. Doesn't that change the way you think about this?
No, because that was my opinion last time, and I thought, well, I was going to go with the party that would deliver. Obviously, it's not just one thing. It's more than that. It needs to, as the point you've raised earlier, it needs to be about crime. Yeah. It needs to be about the safety of everyone within the UK, and a central party with all values at stake. Be it middle class, whatever, ignoring the class system.
So is it time?
It is.
Ken, is what you're saying, but time has now come to vote for what you believe in, regardless whether people tell you they might or might not win the constituency.
Exactly, because my vote hasn't counted so far. So if that occurred, and if you say you led it, then I believe that would be the case.
Interesting. Ken, thank you. And Ken from Southend saying it's time for principle. It's time to vote for something that might actually deliver. Because that is the problem, folks, isn't it? We're increasingly feeling whoever we vote for, whatever they promise us, whatever they tell us, they simply don't deliver. Nigel, we need a Brexit party. The Conservative and Labour parties think that if they just stop us, well, look, Philip, I hear all of this, but I do get back to that problem. We live in a first-past-the-post electoral system. I wonder how many of you, it works the other way around too. You might naturally be a Labour supporter, worried, in the Midlands, worried that if you vote for a new party, you'll let the Tories win that seat. The key to this is how strong are our tribal allegiances to the Labour and Tory parties, or are our feelings about being leavers or indeed remainers now stronger than that? And that is the absolute key, folks, to this debate. 0345 6060 973. Let me know what you think. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's now 11:15. Is the Brexit earthquake going to extend to our existing two big political parties, or will the first-past-the-post system keep them in check? Can a new party succeed in British politics? Well, you listened to Professor Goodwin on from the University of Kent earlier saying that whilst we're not used to this kind of thing in this country, there's more potential for it now than perhaps there's ever been. And he pointed out what Macron had done, and indeed how the whole of Italian politics has been completely transformed. Difference being, of course, Italian politics does operate on proportional representation, although, interestingly, in France, their Assemblée Nationale is first past the post, and Macron took it by storm. Fascinating. Phil is a new caller from Cambridge. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. And I'm always fascinated, Phil, with this question, though. Is it possible to break the stranglehold these two parties have on British politics? And maybe now's a moment when we can, actually genuinely think that a change could be in the air.
Well, I'm not saying that we probably need a new party. What we need to do is get the parties we've got in order. I mean, currently personally, I'm a Conservative, and I think our party's a mess at the moment, and we have people fighting for something that don't actually want to join the fight or never wanted to be in the fight. I think it's probably better that the party itself replaces the current leader with somebody that's more apt to the job, and we go back to the EU and we tell them that we are going to leave on the designated date, and what are you going to do to entice us to stay in your club? In that instance, if they, whatever they say, we need to tell them that they need to imagine their future without us and our influence, and more importantly, our money in their club.
All right, fine, Phil, I get it. And actually, in terms of what we do with the European Union, I think you're absolutely bang on the money. But if Theresa May does that, would Nicky Morgan, would Anna Soubry and the others just leave the party? I mean, would that split the Conservative Party? I mean, the point I'm making, Phil, is how on earth do Jacob Rees-Mogg and Anna Soubry stay together in the same political party?
Well, I have no idea, to be honest, because I'm a moggist, if that's what you want to call me.
A moggist.
Anna Soubry doesn't hold a lot of credibility with me.
By the way, Phil, did you hear him on Friday?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so
out
he's
of the country.
Well, for those that don't know, Jacob is now going to be doing Friday evening. So I do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, 6 till 7, and Jacob's now going to be doing Fridays over the course of the next few months. So as a moggist, you can tune into LBC at 6 o'clock on a Friday, and you can call him as well. But Phil, you have identified with the Brexit side of this argument, but when you've got leading Conservative supporters like Matthew Parris suggesting Jacob gets kicked out of the party, Phil, does it occur to you that the Tory party that you support could split?
Yes, and it's horrific, the concept of it. As a team, let's imagine that they're two football teams. At the end of the day, you play a team game to win the game. And at the end of the day, if some people have to sit on the bench, they have to sit on the bench. And unfortunately, with the Conservative Party, everybody wants to play and everybody's making a mess of the game.
They are in one hell of a state. Phil, thanks for your call. And Phil, trying to be loyal. See, Phil wants to find solutions that keep the Tory party together, and I understand that. I just wonder how many of you feel the time has come to break away from the Labour or the Conservative Party. James, as a new caller, we're back to Canterbury. Canterbury's dominating today's show for some reason, James. How are you?
Thanks for taking my call.
Not a bit. So, is there room for a new party in politics?
Yeah, I think there's a massive room. Like, I'm at university, and I talk to some people, and there are quite a lot of Brexiteers in Canterbury. It's just that people don't really like to talk about it in public.
The politics that dare not speak its name, I know.
That's it. And some of the people that I do talk to who aren't really that much, they're not very into it, but all they really know is they're Remainers. And when I talk to them about voting out, and I throw a few points at them, like lowering wages, and it's been going on. Some of them are like, "Oh God, that seems like that's quite a good argument." And I don't think they'll budge, but I do feel that when you actually explain to them some of the arguments, they do actually kind of understand really. And you look at UK politics, and you go on social media, and you compare it to other countries like America, and you see some of the stuff and how much more engaged they are in social media and talking to normal people and just Instagram followers and just little things like that. And I just feel like we're really far behind on that kind of thing over here.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But James, so if Brexit, let's just say that Article 50 finishes up getting extended, it looks like we're not going to get anything like the Brexit we voted for, or indeed were promised. Then is that the space into which you think a new party could succeed?
Massively. I don't really see the I don't really see a massive difference between the two parties. Massively, really. I'm very jealous of America for having two parties that are actually very different.
Yes. There's a proper choice in America, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I just think here there are people just voting just so the other party doesn't get in. And in America, I'm just really jealous of how people are actually, the two parties are very different, really.
Now, dare I ask you, James, as a student, and maybe you rung in under an assumed name, I don't know, which of those American parties do you prefer?
Conservative.
Okay. I mean, would you dare tell your fellow students in Canterbury that you had an ounce of sympathy for the Donald?
Yeah, I have in my accommodation. And they've looked at me a bit strange, but like I'm not going to be quiet about it. So yeah.
Good for you. I like that. You're standing up for what you believe in. Top man, James. Thank you. Interesting. Oh dear. Labour can survive Brexit as it doesn't have the same level of split as the Tories have. I get on Twitter, and I think that's true to some extent. The Tory split is absolutely chronic in Westminster. Out of the country, and Professor Goodwin backed this up, 70% of Tory members are leavers, and 25 or so percent are, quite strong on the Remain side. Labour's problem is different. It's a very different problem. Labour's problem is not its membership, which, of course, as you remember, with £3 a pop, exploded under Jeremy Corbyn. But we learned today 150,000 members haven't renewed in the last year. And the Labour Party membership is becoming, from what I can see of it, increasingly London-dominated, increasingly Remain, increasingly pro-second referendum, and yet the leadership is trying to stop Labour becoming the party of a second referendum. No, Labour's problem is different. And Labour's problem, actually, is out there in the country. It's the voters, 5 million of whom did vote for Brexit. So, we'll just have to see. Dave in Kingston says, you'll never get the leading lights of Brexit like Jacob or Kate Hoey to join a new party because of their tribalism. Well, listen, I don't know. I've no idea how British politics is going to shake down. What I'm discussing right now is there the possibility for it? And I have to say, I do think that if the Brexit ball gets dropped, I think there is room for a new party. But I am conscious that overcoming the first-past-the-post political system is a devil of a job, as I probably know better than almost anybody alive. Diane is calling from Bexhill. Good morning, Diane.
Hello, Nigel. Nice to hear you laughing.
Well, you've got to in these. Really. It's called trench humour, Diane. I think but.
Oh dear. I think there is. I think both parties are doomed. To be honest, I think the first-past-the-post system is just so ridiculous now. I know we've learned what that leads to. I mean, May is leading a party who are trying to get her to do things she doesn't want to do because she's a Remainer. Corbyn is a Leaver. His people are trying to get him to do things he doesn't want to do.
I know, it's funny, isn't it?
And the thing is, all these Tory whips and doing all this, I think the two-party machine has got to go. It really has got to go because 402 constituencies voted out. And those MPs, a lot of them, they had the right to vote for one single vote, their vote, but they are voting against what their constituencies said.
But, Diane, I agree with that completely.
And I think what you said before, going back to what you said before, the level of trust and what we need and what many people are waiting for, believe me, is another party to come in the middle of these two opposites. Of just slinging, mudslinging and, no, you're doing this wrong. We need a middle road party who, can address the different woes that we've got in this country. But, we need to stand firm and we need to leave. And if they don't leave, I agree with all your other previous people, the anger is building. And do not ignore the silent majority. Ignore it at your peril because these politicians will be out.
For we are the people of England who have not yet spoken. Diane, I think that's right. I think it all depends. It seems to me it depends on circumstance here. If Brexit does not get delivered, then I think the space and the gap will be there. Diane, I thank you. There's a lot of passion about this. People really are feeling let down. Chris in Darlington says, a new party should be less Thatcherite than UKIP was seen to be. Good policies would be stop HS2, absolutely, and spend the money saved on training young people in useful skills. Also, tax the big corporates fairly. Chris, you're busy writing the manifesto for a new party, but again, there is this dilemma of you've got people on the left of centre voting Brexit and the right of centre voting Brexit, but I think there are issues like Brexit, there are issues like grown-up immigration controls that actually cross all traditional boundaries of left and right. If the Brexit ball gets dropped, the potential there is going to be absolutely huge. Who knows? We may well, in 68 days' time, be leaving on WTO rules. I'm not going to hold my breath for that one. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It's now 11:30. And is there room for a new party in British politics? Whether it's yes or no, call me 0345 6060 973. And of course, the great thing here is the first past the post electoral system makes it very, very difficult. But circumstances are fascinating. Some breaking news: a dinghy containing suspected migrants has been towed into Dover by the Border Force this morning. Yes, well, of course, I don't think that suspected will last very long. And all of this as we learn over the weekend that 117 more people have drowned in the Mediterranean as another migrant boat has capsized. You can add to that 2,200 who died last year crossing the Mediterranean. Since this crisis started, we're looking at 7,000 or 8,000 people that have drowned in the Mediterranean. It is only a matter of time before we get something like that happening in the Straits of Dover. And I repeat the point I made a couple of weeks ago. We ought to be clear that absolutely nobody that comes to Kent via this route illegally will be allowed to stay in our country and claim refugee status here. They have come already from a safe country. And unless we put that message out, there will be drownings, I'm sorry to say, in the English Channel. As it is, every single person that comes in via this route finishes up in a centre somewhere. I don't think any single one has been sent back anywhere, and nor will they be. So at the moment, we are encouraging these criminal gangs to continue with their business. We've got this wrong. OK, now, I get this from Chris in Reigate. Your expert was right. That was Professor Goodwin who talked at the top of the hour. Most decent, ordinary people want a party which is tough on immigration, but which delivers good public services. None of the parties are delivering. Isn't just about delivering, Chris. I think it's about these promises. It's about these outright lies that get told at every election. I mean, OK, immigration's cropped up. Conservative 2010 manifesto, we'll reduce it to tens of thousands. No chance. 2015 manifesto, we'll reduce it to tens of thousands. No chance. 2017, we'll reduce it to tens of thousands. No chance. Oh, we'll deliver Brexit and take back control of our borders. Look at the latest immigration proposals, which are suggesting actually the numbers could go up considerably in the course of the next few years. This is part of that breakdown of trust. This is what creates potentially the environment for a new party. And The Sun today did a big piece on this, calling it UKIP. So what's the truth of all of it? Well, a lot of new parties have been formed over the course of the last year or two. A registration has been put into the Electoral Commission for the Brexit Party, all right? And it's headed up by a lady called Catherine Blakelock, and she told me she was going to do this, and it's got my full support in every way. I think, that at some point, a party with that name might be needed. It may not be, but it might well be needed. But the idea that somehow, I'm being coy about whether I'm going to become the party leader or whatever. Look, my position is, and it's very, very clear, I want to make it really clear to all those people in Westminster, on both parties, that if they think they can betray Brexit and get away with it scot-free, they can't. There will be a new political party, and yes, I very much hope in those circumstances to be part of it. I don't want to do this, but if I have to do it, I will. And please don't think, any of you, that it's just the Tory party this could hurt. In 2015, David Cameron won a majority, which he hadn't expected to do, because the UKIP 4 million votes hurt Labour in terms of seats more than it hurt the Conservatives. So come on, MPs, you can stop the need for this new Brexit party by just delivering Brexit. It's not difficult, really, is it? But is the space there? Ollie is a new caller from Durham. Ollie, hi.
Hi, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good morning to you. So, is there room for a new Brexit-type party?
Yeah, I actually believe there is. And I know that you're associating yourself with this new party that has just been put into the Electoral Commission. And so that probably means that the party will be on the sort of centre-right of the political spectrum. But what frustrates me is the lack of centrist voices, liberal voices who are advocating for leave and democracy and obeying the result of the referendum. So I think if you wanted a successful new political force, it should actually occupy the centre but be pro-Leave.
I don't know, Ollie, what sort of left and centre and right even mean anymore, really. I think the whole thing has changed so much. But you talk about those liberal voices for Leave. I mean, it's quite difficult, really, isn't it? Because most people who today would self-identify as liberal are Remainers.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, if you look at the Liberal Party from which the Liberal Democrats sort of emerged, they actually still exist as like a minor force.
Yes, they do.
They were pro-Leave.
Yes, they do. They do. You're absolutely right. And there is still an SDP that still exists from years ago, and they're pro-Leave as well. And it's always fascinated me that people that called themselves liberals would actually be supporters of a big, giant anti-democratic club. It didn't make any sense to me in terms of history whatsoever.
No, I agree.
So you think, Ollie, what you're saying is that for a new party to succeed, it must not be seen to be too far out on any end of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. When Caroline Lucas in that debate said that it was a project by the right for the right, and Brexit needs to not be seen like that. Yeah. And the space really is there in the centre ground because the Liberal Democrats have collapsed on themselves. So
it's funny how politics changes, Ollie. There's a fella called Lord Stoddart of Swindon, and he's about 90 now. And he sits in the House of Lords, and he was Labour all his life, a former railwayman. He was Labour. He was a minister in Wilson's government, an old, Tony Benn style, fierce Eurosceptic, brilliant public orator. And he said in the 1975 referendum, the Times, in one of their editorials, described David Stoddart as a dangerous left-wing extremist, because he wanted us to leave what was then called the EEC. He said, the funny thing is, nearly 50 years on, people say with my views I'm a dangerous right-wing extremist. So it's very, very funny how perceptions of this change. And actually, even when I first joined the European Parliament, Ollie, there were more Eurosceptics on the left in the European Parliament than there were on the right. So it's very shifting sands, it seems to me, some of these definitions of left and right. Ollie, thank you, and you make a very, very fair point. I have voted only 4 times in my life, mainly because I have no belief in the political system. A centrist party is needed badly. So there's a few of you saying this, that whatever happens here, a new party must not be seen to be too much on the right, or indeed on the left. Nigel, given your opposition to the first-past-the-post system, would you support a second referendum on the alternative vote? Or would that be undemocratic, says Liam in London? Liam, I cannot believe we had a referendum on the alternative vote, a system that was preferential, not even proportionate. It was a absolute Clegg's biggest disaster, having fought for years for proportional representation, was to allow a referendum to go through for a system that nobody could explain in a sentence and that didn't actually work. The whole thing was a disaster. I have, for a long time now, supported the AV Plus system, and this is something that Roy Jenkins, because Tony Blair asked him to go away and come back with a way of updating British politics. And back in 98, Roy Jenkins came back with AV+. What does it mean? It means the constituency of Guildford, for argument's sake, would become 25% bigger than it is now. The person who came first would be regardless of their political shade, would represent Guildford, and that link between the constituent and the member would be maintained. Then, for the last 25% of seats in Parliament, there'd be a second vote, and you'd vote for a party list system on that. And then any particular view in this country, which had appreciable support, like 5% or more, would be represented in Westminster. And, so many people say, well, look, I'm a Conservative, and I live in Sheffield, or, I'm Labour and I'm living in East Grinstead. I mean, what's the point of going to vote? There's no incentive. You know already who's won the constituency. At least with AV+, there'd be a second vote, and you could perhaps vote for something, perhaps a new idea that would get representation in politics. It's a terrible system to make sure that we preserve in aspic these two big parties, and we try and stop new thought and new ideas coming through. It's a disaster, actually. Johnny is a new caller from Rayleigh. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. Good to speak to you, mate.
Good to speak to you. So we're just talking about first past the post and all its difficulties, but But what do you think, Johnny? Is there room for a new party?
In my job, I meet lots of people every day from all walks of life, from lords and literally lords to literally bus drivers. And the one thing I hear over and over again is I'm politically homeless. So there's clearly a need for another party. How that would be formed, that's a completely different issue. And in my own opinion, I don't think we need a party that's centre, left or right. What we need is a party that does right, does the things that people want. So it's quite compatible in my mind to have controls on immigration, but also have workers' rights, which if you have a left and a right party would be considered to be incompatible. So just do the right thing. I mean, it's a bit glib, but a common sense party, if you like.
No, Johnny. Hey, you know. By the way, what's your career right now?
I drive a London taxi.
So you do me absolutely a massive cross-section of society doing that. No, absolutely. Well, you never know, Johnny. You could be packing it up soon because the new party may well need somebody to write phrases and titles for them. But doing right, I think, is very, very good. So you really feel it, Johnny. I mean, compare it to 5 years ago, 2 years ago. Is there a change of mood about all of this?
Completely. It's the party system, as I grew up knowing it, doesn't seem to exist anymore. People don't feel... When I speak to people, don't seem to feel that either of the main parties, and as the Lib Dems, they're irrelevant. The main parties don't represent them entirely. There'll be things they say, well, yeah, I agree with that, but I couldn't possibly go along with something else. I mean, I'm sure Dominic Grieve has got a really good heart and he's a very nice man, but his position on Brexit, in the eyes of a lot of people, is completely unacceptable, and that probably applies to Anna Soubry as well. I'm sure she's a decent person and she's got, her heart's in the right place, but not necessarily her politics.
Johnny, not left and right, just doing the right thing. Like that, not bad. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's now 11:45. Are we being represented properly by our political parties? I mean, they're breaking apart at the seams, it would appear. Brexit, just too difficult for them to cope with. Is it time for not just a new Brexit party? Is it actually time for British politics to be reshaped? Now, getting that to work under a first-past-the-post system is very, very difficult, as I know better than most, but maybe the conditions are better for it than they've been before. Brian is a new caller from Glasgow. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So, is British politics, is there room? I mean, you've already seen big change, of course, in Scottish politics with the rapid growth of the SNP. But more broadly, because of Brexit, do you think we need to realign our parties?
I think the whole thing's broken. It's broken promises, broken electoral system, broken parliament, and now you've got a broken country. As a Scot, I feel totally disenfranchised. During the Scottish referendum, Project Fear was used, and Scotland was told the only way we could stay in the European Union was if we voted to stay within the UK. Then Scotland sent 56 SNP MPs down to Westminster who voted against the referendum bill, still went through, who voted against triggering Article 50, it still was triggered. 62%, every electoral area in Scotland voted to remain within the EU. We're getting pulled out against their wishes.
Well, you should be very happy, Brian, shouldn't you? You should be very happy that Brexit's being betrayed.
Yeah, but it's still indicative. The people who voted leave, they can feel angry because they're being ignored. I feel like I'm sitting on the sidelines watching something, a game that's being played that is affecting me, but I have no say in it.
So were you, Brian, were you for Scottish separation then in that referendum? Right.
Yes.
Right. So are you like Nicola Sturgeon? Are you like Nicola Sturgeon that you actually don't respect the result of either of those referendums?
What do you mean don't respect the results? We respected the result of the Scottish referendum, and we're working within the political system.
But then Nicola wants another referendum, doesn't she?
Yes, I think the only way Scotland's vote is going to be recognised is if we do go. Leave us talk about, and you yourself, Nigel, were talking about sovereignty. Scotland wants sovereign. We're a sovereign country. We were told we're a family of nations. We're equality within the system. And two members of the family of nations have said they want to leave. Two have said they wanted to remain. But the ones who want to remain are getting pulled out anyway. They're running the
Well, of course, we are a united kingdom, Brian. But, Brian, whenever I hear this argument about sovereignty from the SNP, I mean, it's difficult not to choke on my coffee because the SNP's idea of sovereignty is to be governed by Mr Juncker. It's just bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah. I was asked by one of your colleagues on LBC, why did I vote to leave the UK and voted to stay within the EU? Totally different. It's to do with respect. Scotland has got respect, and small countries are respected.
Oh no, they're not, Brian. They're walked all over.
No, look at what they're doing with Southern Ireland. They're protecting Southern Ireland and Southern Ireland's wishes.
Well, I think joining the euro pretty much destroyed the Irish property market and left them with debts that their great-great-grandchildren won't pay off. But, hey, that's a separate argument. Brian, I do not understand, and I know it is separate, but I do not understand how you can argue for an independent Scotland that is part of the European Union. But, hey, Brian, I understand your point. You've been on the losing end of two referendums, and I do understand that, but I would ask you, in return, to spare a thought for those that have been on the winning side of one referendum and are now beginning to seriously worry whether they're going to get it. That was Brian. Different perspective. Barbara is a new caller from Caerphilly in South Wales again. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning, Nigel.
Welcome to the show. So,
thank you.
Is there, and now you are obviously, South Wales has been pretty dominated over the years by the Labour Party, but there have been some changes over the last few years with more Conservatives getting elected in Wales. If Brexit's not delivered, could a new party do well in South Wales, Barbara?
I think so. I mean, I've spoken to many people. This is myself. I voted Labour ever since I was old enough to vote. But last election I voted Conservative because Theresa May said Brexit means Brexit.
Yep.
My mother, who is 92, has always voted Labour, and now she says she is no way would she ever vote Labour again, and I feel exactly the same. So I feel, well, both of us do, many in my family feel, where do we go from here? Who do we vote for?
Yeah, you see, it's very interesting, isn't it? As the Labour Party becomes more and more dominated by the metropolitan elites of London, the traditional Labour voters like your mother are just left outside of this party. It is fascinating. Barbara, no, it's a very interesting case, and you make it well that there is a lot of people out there who are feeling effectively politically homeless. Thank you. Fully agree with Ollie, I am young, 27, I'm a Brexiteer who would vote only for a new party if it was centrist. That message coming through from quite a lot of you. You want a party to appear that it's not big time on the right, and I'm getting that message. Nigel, I've been made politically homeless. I did not vote in the general election of 17 because I'm not a Tory and I would never vote for Corbyn. I want a party with positive politicians, people with ambition. Well, ambition. Do you mean believing in Britain and things like that? Wouldn't that be absolutely lovely? Left, right and centre are far too simplistic. Your previous caller had it spot on. I think that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. I think Johnny, our London taxi driver, as he said, he wants just common sense, and that's what he sees the need for. And he speaks to a lot more members of the public than any of us do, really. Frederick is a new caller from Redbridge. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel. Pleasure to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. Well, I mean, these parties, Frederick, are split, aren't they? The Tories are horrendously split, and we've just had, a family from South Wales on there who've been voting for the Labour Party almost since they were founded, and they've no idea where to go.
Well, I've always been a staunch Tory supporter, but the way that things are going in the Tory party at the moment, I feel like I'll never want to vote for them again. And there's so much conflict at the moment in both parties. I see it's almost inevitable that there will be some sort of split. But I thought one of the possible solutions to this would be if party election manifestos were made a legal commitment, and then if they stood on that manifesto, they would then not be able to renege and go around it in the way that Dominic Grieve and Anna Sowerberry are carrying on at the moment. It's just outrageous.
If manifestos were legally binding, you wouldn't find a single candidate, I suggest, to be honest with you. Now, I mean, Frederick, they can't be legally binding because, let's be fair, circumstances do change, and that's a reasonable thing to say. However, for these MPs who themselves voted for Article 50 to now pretend that no deal was never part of the option does make me very, very angry. Frederick, the real question is, your Conservative is feeling homeless. The real question is just how many of you are there? Are there enough Fredericks from Redbridge to get a party that wins many, many millions of votes and seats?
Well, the problem is that Redbridge always used to be a fairly staunch Conservative voting constituency, but with the population change that's taken place over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, it's now swung sort of fairly heavily towards Labour. And my MP, who is Wes Streeting, the first time I think that he was elected, he got a majority of probably about 6,000 or 7,000, and then it becomes a case of people voting for the personality rather than the party. I suppose that's another factor that could influence it as well. Yep, no, there are lots of influences. Frederick, I've got time for one last caller. Very quickly, I'm sorry, Dara from Harrow, we haven't got long. Please make your point.
Morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
I'm a Labour member. I'm going to be actually struggling to renew my Labour membership because I think this is actually going to split the party between the metropolitan elites in London, whether they be Corbynistas or Blairites who are pro-globalisation, very internationalist, and people from traditional blue-collar working-class households like mine in the suburbs of London, and even in the north of the country and in South Wales, who are just sick of the fact that working-class people's voices are being sidelined in Labour. I mean, you only have to look at the composition of the parliamentary party with people like Chuck Ramuna, Sadiq Khan, Yvette Cooper, Liz Kendall, previously Ed Balls as well, to realise that these people, you know, not only don't live in the world that lots of working class people do, but they just simply don't understand our concerns on free movement and how that undercuts wages, and on the austerity project which Europe has inflicted on so many countries. And I think I'm a young person myself. A lot of my generation are Remainers, partly due to the fact that in our schools lots of teachers do impress pro-Remain views on us, which is unfortunate.
I tell you what, Dara, I'm out of time with you, which is a shame. When we talk about education, you ring up next time. Dara, thank you. And Dara making the point, it is not just the Conservative Party with real problems over Brexit. There are millions of people like Dara out there who support the Labour Party. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 o'clock. At 3 this afternoon, it's Ian Payne. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel.